Hey, super fun to have an opportunity to come up, stand in front of you today, and open the Word of God together with you. Andrew said I'd tell you a little bit more about who I am. We can do that around breakfast tables over the course of time. Talk about this thing of being Andrew and Jared's boss. None of that's true. I just get the absolute privilege of locking arms with these guys and helping to walk with them into this thing of seeing Providence Church do what it is that God's called us to do. Our family, my wife and I, 5 kids in tow, love the invitation to come be a part of this family. And excited to see what it is that the Lord has in store in the coming days in and through Providence Church, both for this part of the city, but ultimately for the ends of the earth. And I think the Lord is up to something. I think it's something beautiful. And just a privilege to have a chance to maybe speak into that a little bit today. I'm one of those guys that believes that every time the church comes together, God has something He would love to say to us. And my prayer is that in the next few moments, somehow the Spirit of the living God would allow the words out of this guy's mouth to be anointed of Him, such that they would then be able to go deep into each of our hearts, wherever you're coming from. Whatever it is that life looks like right now for you, that these words would go into our hearts and would somehow draw us closer to Him and would somehow help us become a little more of who He wants us to be when we walk back out of these doors. And so I do want to encourage you to listen today. Not so much to my voice, but just listen for what it is that the Lord might have to say to you. Maybe even jot a few notes along the way. If there's something that you would say, I better hang on to that one. Last Sunday, Jared took us into Ephesians chapter 2. Just so you know, I love Andrew and Jared. I think they're both incredible guys and doing an incredible job. Jared last week, in a very beautiful way, took us into Ephesians chapter 2. And he talked about the idea of Providence Church experiencing gospel-centered unity that displays Jesus to the world. Gospel-centered unity that displays Jesus to the world. I think it's a beautiful picture for what the church ought to be about. Today I'm going to take us into a little piece of that to ask the question, how do you get to a place of having gospel-centered unity? It's a great idea, and I think it's what the church ought to have, but how do we get there? And recognize this, we do not experience gospel-centered unity simply because we gather together Sunday after Sunday. The fact that we walk in this room and we eat breakfast together and we gather together to worship and pray and listen to the word preached doesn't inherently give us some sense of unity. It's just a group of people in the same room together. So what brings us to a place where we truly have unity? Well, there are a number of places in the Gospels in particular where Jesus drops statements on His people. He says things like, if you hold to my teaching, you will know the truth will set you free, and by this the world will know you are my disciples. John chapter 13, you don't need to turn there, but it's another one of those places. Jesus says this, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. I want to suggest to us today as a church family that gospel-centered unity becomes a reality. A reality that the watching world will get to taste if we truly love one another. Here's the deal with that, though. You look across this room and there are some crazy, wonderful people in this room. people that are lovable. I think of like Carrie and Bailey, just incredible folks who are easy to love. And then as you look across this room, there are some others. Like, y'all thought I was going to say Jared and Andrew, didn't you? Man, there are others of us in this room that are crazy, annoying people. Just the way we carry ourselves. That dude doesn't have a beard like either one of those guys. He's half bald, doesn't have a cool haircut. He doesn't even have skinny jeans on. And let me just tell you something. If you need to know anything about me, it's not going to happen. But there are some people around us that are hard to love. And so what we inevitably end up doing in the church is we begin to sort of gauge the lovability of the people around us. And whatever it is our metrics are, we put people through that filter and determine, is this person worthy of my love? Or do they drive me nuts, or are they radically different from me, and therefore I'm going to just keep them at arm's length? And I think what has inevitably happened in church after church after church is we have gone back to our middle school years and we've simply formed these little cliques where we latched onto a few what we consider to be lovable people, and we said, I'm just going to kind of stick with these folks. And then the new gal walks in, desperate for a place to belong, desperate for a sense that she matters to somebody, and yet looks around the room and can't find, all right, which one of these little cliques do I fit into? Or the old guy walks into Providence Church, says, uh-oh, this joint's filled with a bunch of young people. I'll never be loved here. Now, in the brief existence of Providence Church, having an opportunity to watch this thing from a number of different perspectives, I have to say this. I think what's going on in Providence is beautiful. There is something fun about walking into gatherings of Providence Church, whether it's Sunday morning or a prayer time or just something going on out in a coffee shop. There is something beautiful about the people of Providence Church. But I've also been studying the American church across the board, and here's what I've seen. Like 99.9% of churches out there, though they might have started with this beautiful, exciting, life-giving, somewhat unified thing, inevitably they grow down into some deep valley of just being a handful of cliques. 80% of the American church is either stagnant or dying. Why is that? I think it's because people don't truly love one another. And so Christ followers have a hard time finding their place, let alone somebody who doesn't even yet know Jesus. And what Christ wanted for his church is that we would love one another deeply. As I have loved you, so I want you to love one another. And Jesus elevates it from, hey, here's a good idea, to a new command I give you. We ought to be a people who are deeply focused on loving others. And I think when the church loves one another well, gospel-centered unity truly is on display and Jesus is made known. So here's my suggestion. I don't think loving one another is about the lovability of the people around us. And I want to suggest to us that instead of gauging how lovable others are, husbands and wives, if you've been at this marriage thing long, you know exactly what I'm saying here. I don't think loving one another is supposed to hinge on the lovability of the people around us. I think the real issue, or for me, the real struggle in loving others has everything to do with my own selfishness. I want to spend the next few minutes trying to dig down into what I just said there. What if instead of looking at people and determining are they lovable to me or not, we instead look inside? And I think what we will find is it doesn't matter how lovable you are. Jesus called me to love. And the only thing that stands in the way has nothing to do with you, but everything to do with me. Spent a lot of time doing marriage counseling, premarital counseling. Spending time with couples who are dreaming about what's about to be and couples who are looking back at the dream that once was. And time again, husbands and wives or boyfriends and girlfriends, they gauge how much love they're going to extend to their spouse or their fiance based on how lovable their spouse is in that particular season. Kent, you don't understand how he's treating me these days. When Jesus said love one another, he didn't put any parameters on that. He didn't say love when people are lovable. He said, I want you to do like I did. So, if you have a Bible with you, I would invite you to go to the passage that was just read, 1 John chapter 3. Go back toward the end of the Bible. If you get to Revelation, flip forward a few pages. 1 John chapter 3, we find ourselves in the latter years of the Apostle John's life. John has grown to be quite an elderly man at this point, and I think what he's doing in 1 John is he is reflecting back on his own journey. The man walked with Jesus. The man listened to Jesus firsthand. The man was rebuked by Jesus and challenged by Jesus and encouraged by Jesus. And John's going back into his whole journey and then giving the church a summary statement. He's just saying, hey, let me remind you of what it's really all about. 1 John chapter 3, verse 11. He says, this is the message we heard from the beginning. We should love one another. It's interesting, of all the things John could have said there, of all the summary statements of everything that Jesus had poured into these folks' lives, he says, here's the message, folks. Love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. Let me summarize it all for you. John says, here's the message. You should love one another. If people would have gone back to Jesus and said, oh yeah, we heard the king say that. We got that parts. And then he launches into this thing of Cain. And as I was poring over this, I was supposed to talk about loving one another and found myself in 1 John chapter 3, and we could just sort of stop at verse 11 and say, all right, John, we got it. I found myself asking the question, what on earth does Cain have to do with loving one another? Of all the places, John, you could have taken us here. Like, let's go to some giving a cup of cold water to somebody kind of story. John takes us to a murderer. He's going back to Genesis chapter 4, Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. Cain, a murderer of his brother. Here's what I think John is doing. I think John is painting a picture for us, an illustration for us. When he says you should love one another, I think he's saying, and let me help you get a real clear picture of what that isn't about. Takes us into the story of this evil man. Now, if you've studied the Gospel of John, one of Jared or Andrew, I'm paying attention to the sermons. I just don't remember which one talked about this. But if you pay attention to the Gospel of John and the letters of John, John is constantly putting opposites side by side in pictures for us. Dark and light, night and day, death and life. And he does it again here. He says, look, there is Cain and there's Abel. Cain was a man who belonged to the evil one. His actions were evil. He was a man still living in death. And he murdered his brother. And John says, why did he do that? Watch this. Cain murdered his brother because of the evil in his own heart. His brother was a righteous man, wasn't deserving of being murdered. And I'm pouring down through that over these last couple of weeks, just trying to figure out, love one another, Cain killing his brother. How does this fit? And I realized that the main issue John is pointing to in Cain and Abel isn't about the lovability of Abel. I think he's saying, folks, what's going to mess you up in this is the evil, the darkness in our own hearts. Selfishness is what keeps us from loving well. So it could be, not sure which way is the best way to go in my marriage here. There's no evil in my wife's heart. It's a beautiful thing. It could be that for my wife, for me to love my wife, if she were to go into like a ugly moment, and I say, well, she doesn't deserve my love in these days. Maybe that's not about her. Maybe that's about me. Parents, it could be with our children. I've got 5. I know a little bit of what disobedience looks like. It could be that their disobedience is not to impact my love for them. It could be that when they're disobedient and I take it to a place where I'm no longer expressing love, that the real issue is with their dad, not with them. I think that's what John's saying. And so when I look at the church family and I think about this new command to love one another, the first place I must go is an exploration of my own hearts. And I have to start asking myself some questions about the selfishness within me. I don't know if you've had a chance to read A.W. Tozer's book, The Pursuit of God. Jared mentioned the Christian Missionary Alliance, good CMA guy. Tozer spends a lengthy amount of time talking about the sins of self. Let me just give you a little picture of this. There's the sin of self-exaltation. We don't love each other well when we are caught up in self-exaltation. Practically, here's how that works. You and I are in a conversation. Great opportunity for me to just express love to you. How might I do that? Hey, share with me a little bit of your story. And then just sit and listen. Let you pour your heart out. People love to share their story, don't they? You know what most people do in moments like that? Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm going to give you 15, maybe 20 seconds to give me your story. And then I'm going to start thinking, all right, how do I get this dude to shut his mouth so I can explain to him how incredible I am? Right? Watch this. Try it tomorrow. Just go up to somebody and say, hey, tell me about yourself. Or watch the next time somebody says, hey, how are you doing today? Most people don't really care. So if you don't just give them the, I'm fine. Hey, you know what? I'd love to pull up a chair and I'd love to share with you how I'm doing. You're going to see something happen in their countenance so fast. Oh, snap. I don't have time for this. I am not interested in actually hearing how you're doing. Because I got more important things to do. I'm more important than sitting here listening to you. Self-exaltation. It happens all the time. So the issue might not be the lovability of the person across that breakfast table from me. The issue may be I'm all wrapped up in me. There's also selfish expectation. I have expectations when I walk into the church. I got expectations of the pastors. That Andrew preached in a t-shirt the other day, it's unfathomable. I woke up this morning, I was like, sweet, I'm going to Providence, I can wear jeans. We have expectations of people around us. My wife has lived as a pastor's wife for almost 20 years now. Carrie and Bailey, there are expectations that get placed on you guys. And let me just get real honest real fast. Some people will treat somebody like a pastor's wife, not based on sorting through their own crud, but on their perceived, is she meeting my expectations for what a pastor's wife ought to be? And we start to gauge the lovability of such people. And then we extend or withhold love based on whether we think they're lovable. It isn't about that. Jesus said, love one another. And if you're struggling with loving somebody, look inside. It could be you've got some expectations that you got to let go of. Self-centered entitlement. It's a little different. Watch this. I am entitled to certain things, like comforts. I am entitled to having the person that sits beside me on a Sunday morning haven't taken a shower in the last day. And the reality is the church repeatedly doesn't love that person because I'm entitled to something more comfortable than this. And we think, well, they just need to get themselves cleaned up. Now, Jesus didn't say anything about that. So I think the reason John takes it from we should love one another to Cain and Abel is I think he wants us to see here's what's going to mess this up for us. Our own evil. Our own evil actions. Our own darkness. And he says when you aren't loving your brother, you're still in death yourself. Now, one last piece in these verses. He then throws in the little statement and says, oh, by the way, don't be surprised if the world hates you. Wait, what? Because we're talking about putting Jesus on display. Gospel-centered unity that displays Jesus. And if we love one another, then we're just going to be one big, happy, kumbaya kind of church family. And the world's just going to be so blessed. It didn't happen in the garden. It didn't happen throughout the Israelites' history. It hasn't yet happened for Jesus and the church. Now, there are many who experience the love, and it's a beautiful thing. But in large part, the world's going to look at us with a finger on our face, and some are going to hate you. Why? I think because it holds a mirror up. I think it's what happened for Cain. He looked at his brother with jealousy. He looked at his brother with this sense of, that guy found something, I don't have it, and I hate you. Expect that the world, some are going to hate us because we love one another. So how do we respond to that? Well, let's close the door a little tighter. Let's just sort of cloister up a bit. We'll just create a safety zone from the world. It's what most of the church out there has done, right? No, we come back at it same way Jesus came back at it. Hey, throw me on a cross and put spikes through my wrists. I'm still going to love you. I just want us to understand this doesn't make it all easy. If we're going to love like Jesus, it's probably going to cost something. So where are we at? Gospel-centered unity that displays Jesus. I think it comes when we truly love one another. And I think the thing that we have to watch for that's going to keep us from loving one another has nothing to do with the lovability of the people around us, but rather it has everything to do with me sorting through my own self-centeredness. All right. So then on a positive side, what does this look like? This may or may not feel positive to you, but look at verse 16. He says, this is how we know what love is. I just told you what love's not. Here's what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. You don't want to know what love is? It's that right there. Jesus Christ laying down his life for us. That's the gospel-centered piece of this. You remember Romans 5:8? But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It had nothing to do with my lovability. Praise God. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth. He says, here's a picture of love. It's not Cain. Rather, it's Jesus laying down his life for us. And that's what I'm calling you now to go do for others. Going to require three things. And if you wanted to write something down, I encourage you to write down these three words. It's going to require sacrifice, it's going to require action, and it's going to require truth. Let me draw that out just a little bit. Loving one another will require sacrifice. It's going to cost us. It's going to mean that you and I have to give of ourselves to others. It's us setting aside self, my desire to exalt myself, my sense of entitlement, my selfish expectations, my self-centered agenda. It's going to require that we set aside self, that we might then be able to, instead of being consumed with me, get consumed with the people around me. Back to premarital counseling. Spent a lot of time with young couples getting ready for this ride into what was supposed to be the most incredible journey of their lives. And it's in those days when everybody's smiling and super excited, and it's fun to look across Providence and see so many people with big old fat diamonds on their fingers and looking forward to weddings. And I'm just like, oh, that's puppy love right there if I've ever seen it. Let me just throw something out real quick on that, and then I'll jump back to what I was going to say. My wife and I are about 20 years in. Went through the honeymoon stage, and almost 20 years later, it still hasn't ended. It's a beautiful thing. So when the world comes screaming at you saying, oh, that puppy love will end, I'll give you my address. Come hang out. We'll show you something. Clean that up, Jared and Andrew. Back to premarital counseling. Sorry, my own kids are in the room, so I'm going to keep everything good. Premarital counseling. I paint a picture for these young men saying, listen, dude, God has called you to sacrificially love this woman. And it's usually in that moment, whether it's in my office or it's actually in the wedding ceremony, that the dude's chest starts to puff out. He cocks his head back, and he's like, I'd take a bullet for her in a heartbeat. And I look at him in all his heroicness, and I say, I know you would. But chances are good you'll never be called to take a bullet for her. So let's just start with the dishes. Dead serious. I get that you just came home from a long day. I get that you're tired. I get that you're entitled to something. I get that you brought the money home that's buying the house or whatever it is you think you did. But your wife is whooped as well. Get off the couch and go do the dishes. Sacrifice for one another. Loving each other is going to require sacrifice. The second thing it's going to require is action. We got to do something. He says, don't just love in words and in tongue. And I'm not real sure what all that means, but don't just talk about it. He says, I want you to do something. Now, Tim downstairs just did the parent talk, and I love what's happening in the kids' ministry of Providence Church. So he kind of wrecked where I'm going with this next, but I'm going to float it out there anyway. In a beautiful way, Tim wrecked it. Tim's downstairs. He can't hear any of this. That's awesome. We talked about Facebook downstairs a little bit. My verdict is out on whether Facebook comes from downstairs or upstairs. I'm not sure yet what I think about all that. Here's something I've noticed with Facebook, though. I have watched families go through absolute tragedy. And somehow I think, or we think, because I jumped on Facebook and typed out a quick little, I'm sending hugs and prayers your way, I have now loved them. Let me just suggest, no, you haven't. Now, John knew nothing about Facebook, but I think if he did, he would have put that in parenthesis here and said, I'm talking about doing things like typing, sending prayers and hugs your way. We talked downstairs, I better clean this up. We talked downstairs about using Facebook as a way for parents to connect around what's going on in the kids' ministry. It's beautiful. I love it. Don't send hugs. What does that even mean? And please don't send prayers people's way. What does that mean? What your desperately hurting friend needs is for the living God to show up in his or her life and minister to them. So send your prayers to him. And then watch this. Grab your keys, jump in the car, and go wrap your arms around somebody's neck. Give them a hug. Go sit on the couch and let them pour their heart out. Family friends just lost their 14-year-old son. Facebook is filled with prayers and hugs being sent their way. I think John would step into that and say, look, we got to do something. There's got to be action to it. You can type a note on Facebook. I've done it like 5 times. You can send a note on Facebook. But Providence family, do stuff for one another. Sacrificial action, and then he says, in action and in truth. So my mind immediately goes to speaking the truth in love, and I can get a little intense, and Jared and Andrew are like, Kent, settle down up there, because kind of beating our people up. I hope that doesn't come across like that. This isn't about speaking the truth in love right here. Look up the Greek, play with the original language. It's simply, let it be actually real. In other words, let your sacrificial action be actually real. Because people can tell the difference. Think about some service projects you've been on before. Sacrificial action. But my heart could care less. How do I know my heart could care less? Because I never went back. I never went and spent hours sitting on the couch just getting to know these folks. Man, I made their bushes look great. I cleaned the yard up. But if it didn't come out of a place of genuine love, I missed the boats. Sacrificial action out of a place of sincere love is what Jesus did for us. Expected nothing in return. Didn't gauge our lovability at all. He just said, I love you. And I'm going to do whatever I can to show you that love. So let me finish with this. I love this building because there isn't a clock anywhere around. It's beautiful. But here's the last piece. I want to give you 3 very, very practical. All right, Kent, I get it. Sacrificial action in sincere love is going to be what I need to focus on. I need to die to myself, get me out of the way so I can do it. But I'm still not sure. How do I begin to practice this? Let me give you 3 very, very simple thoughts that you could start doing even as you walk out of this place today. Number 1, ask more questions and listen than you give answers and speak. Ask more questions and listen than you give answers and speak. Show up in people's lives and throw the door open for them to exalt themselves. Ask questions and just listen. Husbands, ask questions and listen. I get that you know how to solve every problem on the planet. And I get that the greatest thing your wife needs is for your wisdom to come dripping off your tongue like milk and honey. You want some really fun bliss in the marriage relationship. Love her enough to just ask questions and listen. How'd that make you feel? Hey, what are you dreaming about these days? And then just listen. It's a beautiful quote. I have no idea who said it. plagiarism at its best right here. Listening is so close to loving that the average person can't tell the difference. Listening is so close to loving that the average person can't tell the difference. Ask questions and listen. Number 2, give more than you receive. Acts chapter 20, Paul with the Ephesian elders, he quotes Jesus, who says it's more blessed to give than to receive. Give more than you receive. And if the receiving quotient rises in your life, you got to give more. Is this not what's going south in so much of the world, places like Hollywood, that as the receiving goes up, often the giving goes down? The statistics of giving in the local church, percentage-wise, by far, those with far less give far more. Dead serious, it's a true stats. Why? Because people started off giving, and then they started to receive. And the receiving took off faster than their giving, and they just started to ride that train. If you're going to love one another well, if we are going to love one another well, give more than you receive. Pour it out, because I think it's what Jesus did. Ask questions and listen more than you give answers and speak. Give more than you receive, and serve more than you're served. Some of y'all have roommates. And that roommate of yours is an absolute sloth. Can't put a video game controller down to save his life. Trash piled up all around his little station. And every time the dude eats, if the dishes make it to the sink, they're certainly just shoved there and not washed. He doesn't deserve me washing his dishes. Just try it. Go wash the dishes. Some of us are in marriages, and there's some deep stuff going on in those marriages. And she doesn't deserve me serving her. Or she's looking at me saying he doesn't deserve me serving him. And we start to play games. And then physical intimacy comes into that. They don't deserve. Your loving of others has nothing to do with their lovability. So you jump in and you serve them anyway. Watch what begins to happen in your own hearts. Dark stuff gets replaced by light. Death gets replaced by life. All of a sudden you don't hate the world around you so much, and you're not annoyed with the world so much. There's just this beautiful thing going on inside of you, and Jesus will be seen in you. So it makes me wonder for our church family. A few months into this ride, I think we got a beautiful thing going on. But the trajectory of every other church on the planet has been away from genuinely loving others. I hope we pay attention. And I hope that instead of gauging the lovability of people around us, we gauge the selfishness in our own hearts. And then sacrificially do things from a sincere place. I think the world will see Jesus. I think it'd be a beautiful thing.